When the eyes say one thing and the tongue another, a practiced man relies on the language of the first. Ralph Waldo Emerson. With this quote, the famous poet and philosopher is referring to what most people forget as the foundation of language, body language. Also referred to as nonverbal communication, body language is not just the subconscious acts we use every day to communicate with others about how we feel and what we mean, but it can also profoundly affect how we view ourselves. Hi, my name is Jacklyn Lewis, and all of you know me. But today, I will be exploring the foundation of body language, how we use it to communicate with others without realizing it, also how body language varies throughout different cultures and gender, as well as digging deeper into how our body language shapes how we see ourselves. And finally, I will explore tools that change our nonverbal communication to make it so we can become more confident, powerful people. What is body language, or also called nonverbal communication? Research from the neuroscience department at Humboldt University in Berlin defined nonverbals as how we say things with our bodies, postures and movements, facial expressions, gestures, touching, eye contact, use of space, and so on. As a young woman in the workplace, I use body language every day. Without even thinking, I am communicating with my customers, coworkers, and managers how I feel about them. This silent language is not only limited to the workplace, but we use it when meeting a new acquaintance at a coffee shop to having a disagreement with a spouse at home. Our body language can reveal how we are feeling, and more importantly, how we feel about ourselves. This can be referred to as the presentation of self. According to the textbook titled Business and Professional Communication, this combination of verbal and nonverbal messages tells others about the kind of person we are. It's true that every day we are using our eyes, faces, as well as our posture to communicate our messages, and some even argue that nonverbal feedback is more important than verbal. According to that same Humboldt University research, we may consciously attend to the verbal, but gain more feedback from the nonverbal. It seems we are consciously paying attention to what we are saying, yet both the speaker and listener are gaining more insights from our body language. This might not be news to any of you in the audience if you're really observant, or if you have ever been accused of having resting bitch face. If you have resting bitch face like me, you might find it unfair of how you're being judged before you even open your mouth. That same research journal found that unfortunately, we count facial expression and body movement as more natural and genuine than speech. If you haven't heard of RBF, count yourself lucky, because I have. I have been told by others in social situations and in workplaces that because of my natural expression, I seemed angry or standoffish from afar. Unbelievable, right? Only when these people got to know me were they shocked to find out how fun and accepting I was. Clearly, I was communicating two different selves based on my body language compared to my verbal communication. So what might I have been doing wrong? And how can we all learn to use body language as a tool to present our best selves? Body language is aptly named, as is unspoken language communicated from all over different parts of our bodies. It can start from the way we wrinkle our forehead to the way we wiggle our right foot when we cross our legs. There are names for every type of physical movement or gesture we use. Some popular nonverbal communicators, according to the authors of Business and Professional Communication, are adapters, or unintentional hand, arm, leg, or any other body movements used to reduce stress. Examples include hair tossing or finger drumming, and these can communicate boredom or anxiety to others. Another use of body language that not everyone uses are illustrators, or hand and arm movement that can enhance or reinforce speech. These gestures and movements are learned, and they can change meaning when translated across cultures. For example, according to the textbook Communicating for Results, in the US, a hand gesture formed when putting the thumb and forefinger together means what? Okay or A-okay. But the same gesture in Australia, Brazil, Germany, and Tunisia is considered obscene or even violent. Another example can be the finger curl communicating "come here" in America. This gesture might seem somewhat harmless, but in Asian countries, this gesture is only used for dogs, and so is highly offensive when used on humans. They instead would face their entire palm up and use all 4 fingers to curl in the same gesture. These examples can go on, but it shows the subtleties in nonverbal communication are particularly important to understand as our schools and workplaces become more and more diverse. Because body language is taught differently depending on our culture, we begin to learn the rules as early as infancy. Beyond gestures, eye contact and facial mimicry is an important factor to how infants connect and communicate with their caregivers long before they learn to babble. Interestingly enough, research from the University of London found that 4-month-year-olds only showed evidence of mimicry when they observed facial actions accompanied by direct gaze. Basically, this is a fancy way of saying that infants learn to mimic movement the best when their caregivers were holding direct eye contact. This goes to show that from the time we are born, we are learning and reacting from nonverbal communication, specifically eye contact. Important language skills like this transfer to adulthood, as we probably judge the most about someone from the amount of eye contact they use. A lot of eye contact could communicate power, and if overused, could even signal arrogance. Less eye contact could show signs of shyness, or none at all might signal weakness. We judge a lot based on eye contact, and whether those judgments are true or not, it remains an important nonverbal tool to communicate. In addition to eye contact, humans have evolved to have over 40 individual facial muscles, compared to the only 24 identified muscles in chimpanzees. According to the Humboldt University research, movement of the body is not as important as expressions of the face, as our facial muscles can communicate almost every emotion we are feeling and is the most effective messenger of our true thoughts, whether we like it or not. For example, if we are enjoying a conversation, we might naturally upturn our mouths or start to nod in encouragement as a reminder to the speaker that we are listening. On the other end, if we subconsciously dislike a conversation, we might purse our lips like Meryl Streep or have wandering eyes. These behaviors aren't necessarily good or bad, but being aware of what they communicate to others is a step to using them to change how people perceive us. Just as body language is taught from a young age, nonverbal communication is learned and enacted differently based on the environment someone is in. The textbook Communication for Results refers to these environments as formal and informal levels. These levels of nonverbal behavior tell us the rules and norms that are expected in each situation. For example, we understand that we're going to be acting differently at our workplace in a professional atmosphere compared to how we act with friends in a bar. Differences in nonverbal communication can also be taught differently depending on our gender. Most of you have probably heard of manspreading. It is the observation how men consistently take up more space than women. On the subway, a man might place his legs wider than the woman next to him who has hers crossed. Or in a stadium, a man's arms aren't folded like the woman next to him, but resting comfortably at his side. Indeed, Humboldt University studies indicated that women tend to smile more frequently, have more eye contact, and take up less space in proportion to their body size than men, while men initiate more touch and interrupt more often than women. If you have ever been told to smile more, continuously interrupted by others, you know this nonverbal communication can affect your psyche and your confidence. The same Humboldt University research cites how there's another reason for women's greater eye contact. The listener in a conversation tends to look at the speaker, and men tend to talk more than women do. This is a good time to pause and say a disclaimer. Men in the audience, I'm not picking on you in any way. Our society has just made it easier for your verbal and nonverbal voices to be amplified. All it takes is a bit of self-awareness to understand that body language does affect the genders differently and can be used to show power and dominance. For the women in the audience, you can probably relate to taking up less space, either consciously or subconsciously, by making yourselves smaller. This can be exhibited through body language like shrugging in shoulders, crossed arms, crossed legs, and more. Whether we like it or not, this type of body language is not only communicating to others around us, but to ourselves as well. So how can we implement these nonverbal cues to our advantage? Well, the textbook title Business and Professional Communication recommends that using the combination of eye contact and pleasant facial expressions are the best way to communicate friendliness and approachability. So it's no surprise that on the other end of the nonverbal spectrum, that frowning or looking away is not the best way to invite friendly communication. The use of space is also an important side of body language, as the text Business Professional Communication cites it as among the subtlest aspects of nonverbal communication. Personal space is something that changes with culture, but despite how big or small a personal bubble gets, understanding that impeding in that space can cause bad impressions and sometimes hostile reactions is a good reminder that even the subtlest nonverbal communication still affects others. Some of these tips might be a no-brainer to some of you in the audience, yet for some like me, we might not be fully aware of the body language we are exhibiting at work or when we are meeting new people. Inside, we might not be feeling as confident as we would like to or feel like we always have the right thing to say, but body language is a tool to communicate. In the same way, it can be used as a tool to amplify our confidence, even if we ourselves don't believe it. So how can we use our nonverbals to trick ourselves into becoming more confident or powerful? This phenomenon of our body language not only sending messages to others, but also affecting how we view ourselves, has been best explored by social psychologist Amy Cuddy. Harvard Business School professor, public speaker, and author, Cuddy explores how the body language we display affects our own inner worth. According to Amy Cuddy and other researchers, nonverbal expressions of power and dominance are about expanding, opening up, and taking up space. And this is true all across the animal kingdom. Due to this research, Ms. Cuddy and others were led to what she coined as the power pose, which is a Wonder Woman-like pose, which she found when held for a minimum of 2 minutes, greatly improves confidence and can affect how we present ourselves verbally and non-verbally. Despite the Wonder Woman connotation, this pose is for all genders and is a way to use body language to kind of trick ourselves into exhibiting more confidence. For example, Cuddy's research indicates that when interviewing a sample of people who had practiced the power pose and those who had not before an interview, unknowingly hiring managers were more attracted to the presence, confidence, and enthusiasm of those who had practiced the power pose beforehand. Cuddy explains how this had nothing to do with the content of the interview, but more of the presence that the participant brought to their speech. This goes to show that the body language we exhibit not only affects others, but when used correctly, can greatly affect how competent and confident we view ourselves. By now, you've probably gained more insight into what Ralph Waldo Emerson meant when he said, "When the eyes say one thing and the tongue another, a practiced man relies on the language of the first." Body language is a diverse, subconscious, and subtle language we learn alongside our verbal tongue. That doesn't mean we can't take notice of what we are communicating through our body language and use it not to just consciously change the perceptions others have of us, but how we perceive ourselves. These behaviors can change depending on gender and culture, but being self-aware of how we speak without our voice is the start of changing our nonverbal communication to benefit us and our interactions for the better. Thank you for listening.
Yay!
I want more. That's interesting stuff. I like it.